The video game industry is due for a big shakeup, and I think that there's two sleeping giants that are going to bring that big shakeup, and it's not who you think. If you've been watching my stuff for a long time, I think you could probably guess one of them, but the other one, I don't think that people are going to guess. So let's talk about the first one and how they're going to shake up the industry, and then we'll talk about the second one, who is the one that you guys aren't going to guess at. But feel free to guess. Don't cheat. Don't skip ahead. Feel free to guess now before we go any further. Have you made your guess? I'll wait. Oh, while you're doing that, click the like button because it helps a bunch. And subscribe. Okay, are we ready? Okay, the one that everybody knows that I'm going to say, Valve. Valve is about to shake up the industry. They tried to do this 10 years ago and they failed horribly, absolutely horribly. When they tried to implement Steam machines, Valve wanted to get into the console part of the gaming industry, and they went about it the wrong way. So what went wrong for them? Well, number one, they partnered with third parties to make hardware to run SteamOS on. SteamOS is a Linux-based operating system, and games are not made for Linux, but they didn't want to make their own hardware, so they said, hey, Alienware and others, make hardware, put SteamOS on it, and everybody wins. Except nobody won because it's Linux, and they didn't have that one key thing that they have now, which is Proton. So Valve tried it because they were partnered with OEMs. The OEMs made their stuff too expensive. Why did they make their stuff too expensive? Because they didn't have a store in order to profit off of, so they had to make their stuff too expensive. It wasn't really Alienware's choice to make their, I mean, could they have made it cheaper? I'm sure, but they got to make a profit, right? So the fact that they were too expensive, that was failure part number one. Failure number two was they didn't have Proton, and all of the devs said, I don't want to spend the time to make a Linux version of my game because the people who use Linux are such a small segment of the gaming population that they are not worth catering to. This is not coming from me. This is coming from the game devs. It's not worth catering to that small of a group of people. So because of that, SteamOS died, the Steam boxes died off, and we never got, we went 10 years before Valve decided, okay, let's come back and do this the right way. The right way is by making our own hardware because we can price it cheaper than anybody else can because we have a store and we make money after the fact. Kind of like what consoles do, where they lose money on selling the console. It's their loss leader, and they make up that profit by selling the games to the people who just bought the system from them. It makes a lot of sense. Valve is able to do that because they have a store. The other companies were not able to price things low enough because they didn't have a store. The other thing that they did this time around that they did right was Proton. Proton allows the game devs to just make the Windows version of the game and not really have to worry about whether or not the player is playing on Windows or Linux, with some exceptions when it comes to like multiplayer games and DRM and that kind of thing. But for the most part, most people's Steam libraries just run on Linux no problem now, thanks to Proton. So now that Valve's solved that, they're going to get ready to shake up the industry again. And I've talked about this many times before, and that's where Fremont comes in. Fremont is, the rumored set-top box from Valve that is going to have an HDMI port, like a full HDMI port, just like a console does. And you buy this box, hook it up to your TV. Hopefully it comes with a cool new Steam controller too. And you're playing your games on the TV, just like you would if it's a PlayStation or an Xbox or a Nintendo Switch. So I think that Valve is about to shake up the industry from that end. But they're not the only ones that are going to shake up the industry, because they're not the only sleeping giant right now. There's another sleeping giant that I think a lot of people will be surprised when I say, and that's Microsoft. Microsoft is a sleeping giant. What are you talking about? They got an Xbox Series right now. It's not doing well, but they're not sleeping. Like, they're doing something. They're trying. Are they, though? Microsoft has lost this generation, and Microsoft also lost last generation. But if there's one thing that I learned from, we'll say, the Xbox 360, is that nobody's too big to fail. I learned that from the PS2 as well. Nobody's too big to fail. You go back and you look at the PS2, the greatest, as of the time that I'm recording this, unless of the Nintendo Switch surpasses it, it's the greatest selling system of all time. And then Sony followed that up with the PS3, but at $600, and they got laughed out of the room. Didn't do too well. Everybody ended up buying the Wii and the 360 instead. They bought the Wii for their Nintendo games, because I don't really feel like Nintendo competes with anybody else. They just do their own thing, and we as gamers seem to be okay with that. All right, we'll get the stuff that we want, but for the Nintendo stuff, we'll also get the Nintendo thing. The Xbox 360 did gangbusters. Why did it do gangbusters? Because the PS3 was $600, and people said that that was too expensive. So then the Xbox 360 is doing fantastically well. We move on to the Xbox One. Microsoft is like, they're basically Sony in this case. Sony was, sitting there, we can do whatever we want with the PS3. They could not. And now Microsoft is with the Xbox One. They're showing off their features, and they're like, we can do whatever we want because we did so well with the 360. Who's going to abandon us? Everybody abandoned them. And as Phil Spencer has said many times in the past, that was the worst possible generation that they could ever possibly lose, because that was the generation where people started to build up their digital libraries for the set-top box devices. They started to buy these games, and then suddenly they were going to be able to play them on the next system. They had these digital libraries, and if you had a PS4 and a large library of games, well, you weren't going to buy the next system from Xbox because you wouldn't be able to play all your PlayStation games. So you'd get a PlayStation. If you bought an Xbox One and you had a bunch of Xbox games, you weren't going to go out and buy a PS4 because you wouldn't be able to play your Xbox games. And Microsoft got absolutely trounced in the PS4 Xbox One generation. And that trouncing led forward to this generation, the Xbox Series and PS5 generation. So basically they lost 2 in a row. But if there's one thing that I learned from the Wii U, is that don't count somebody out just because they had a couple of bad days, right? Because Nintendo, they had the Wii U, horrible marketing. They did a really bad job with it. 14.7 million units sold worldwide, globally, or lifetime sales worldwide. Absolutely terrible. So what did Nintendo do? They said, okay, we lost. What can we do about that? Let's stop making Wii U games and start making games for our next system, the Nintendo Switch. Then when we launch the Nintendo Switch, every single month we will launch a banger of a game. And they did it, and it worked. And 150 million Switch units have been sold at this point. Nintendo Switch 2 is poised to just continue that through, because now we've got backwards compatibility, and it's the PS4 to PS5 generation thing all over again. So I do think that Microsoft is poised to come back to the 2 failed generations. So how can they come back from that? Well, here's what I'm thinking, and if you disagree with me, I would love to hear your reasons why in the comment section down below. They decided that they had a crossroads in front of them. This is my analysis. I don't know any behind the scenes stuff. They had this crossroads in front of them, and Satya Nadella, the guy in charge of Microsoft, he had a choice. Do we continue with Xbox, where we lost horribly, or do we cut our losses and get out of gaming? They chose to continue with Xbox, and the way that they chose to continue with Xbox is to buy up a bunch of stuff. They bought Activision Blizzard King. They bought ZeniMax, which I believe got them, I can never remember, Bethesda. Thank you. Why am I saying thank you? Well, thank you. Thank you. You know what? Thank you for subscribing. So there's the thank you. Got them Bethesda, and I think id Software, although I don't know if they bought that separately. They also bought a bunch of other, smaller companies. They bought all these so that in the event that they fall on their face again, they could just say, screw it, let's just become the biggest publisher in the world, and we'll just put our games everywhere. And now they basically have said, okay, we're going to put our games everywhere. Microsoft, Xbox leader Phil Spencer has said, I picked up the email and I sent it to Furukawa over at Nintendo. And I said, you guys are doing great. We're going to put stuff on your system. Everybody's going to be happy. They just had an Xbox developer direct where they showed off games and they're like, Doom the Dark Ages, come to PS5. All these other games coming to PS5, Xbox, Switch. Microsoft is just like, forget it. We're no longer dealing with exclusives. Now, Sony, Nintendo, they still deal with exclusives. And a lot of people look at Microsoft getting rid of the exclusivity and they think, well, that's a mistake. Nobody's going to buy an Xbox. And I think that Microsoft might not really care if people buy an Xbox as long as people are giving them money for playing Xbox games. I look at Xbox at this point as kind of like Surface laptops. Like you could buy a lot of different laptops that run Windows, or you can buy a Microsoft Surface laptop and run Windows. It's really no different. You can play Microsoft or Xbox games on a lot of different systems, or you can buy an Xbox and play those games. So why would you buy an Xbox? Why wouldn't you just get a PS5? Because the PS5 games aren't coming to Xbox. Here's what I think that they're doing. I think that they're going to take a risk, put their games on all these other platforms, and hope that that Xbox brand logo booting up every time somebody plays an Xbox game, which they're the biggest publisher right now, that reminds people, oh, this is an Xbox game. This is an Xbox game. And then when the PS6 and whatever Microsoft decides to name the next Xbox comes out, they'll say, by the way, Game Pass is on this one, and you don't have to buy any of those games. You can just have them as part of your subscription. And that might work. It might. But if it doesn't, I don't think Microsoft really cares, because guess what? You're still buying their games on PC, Nintendo, PlayStation. You're still buying their games. They're still getting money out of your wallet. And that is the company's absolute goal. So I think that we have these two ways that the industry is getting ready to be shaken up. One coming from Valve, getting into the console space, getting their store on TVs, which they've been trying to do for 10 years. And I think it's all about to come to a head. Or we have Microsoft kind of turning into Sega, but also owning all of the biggest friggin' games out there and being able to say, hey, if you want an Xbox, great. We'll sell you one. But if you don't, that's okay too. We'll just sell you our games. And I think that might spell doom for Microsoft. But at the end of the day, if it fails, they can still land on, okay, well, then we'll just stop making hardware and let Sony take all the risks. Now, that makes Sony really, really powerful. And every time that we've seen a company get really powerful, we've seen them overreach. And I talked about that earlier in the video, which is why I really hope that I'm right about what Valve is doing. And because Valve could be the firewall that keeps Sony in check. But what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section down below. And if it's your first time here, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. From the Nerd Nest, I'm Bill. Stay rad. Bye-bye, everybody.